champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. Maybe you're dealing with gut issues or pain, migraines. Maybe you're dealing with cognitive issues like memory issues, mood swings, so many different neurological symptoms. There are so many symptoms associated with parasites. And if you haven't watched my video, Common Symptoms of Parasites, make sure to go and listen to that after we're done here. So how can I talk about this topic? Well, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 30 years ago, and I learned very early on that multiple sclerosis is caused by infections in the body. Little did I know that it is mostly parasites. So I personally have had my own journey of treating parasites, identifying them, and it's really challenging in this day. And I'm going to help you so that if you suspect that you're dealing with parasites, what kind of tests are available, and also what are the shortfalls, what are the advantages and shortfalls of the different types of tests that we have available. So because I treated parasites really well, I have been able to live MS-free for 30 years now. I think it's 31 years, which is amazing. And it's not just my journey, but I have a lot of insights that I share on my trainings because I have had the amazing privilege to coach over 600 people as they are treating these infections and recovering from all kinds of chronic disease. So whether you're somebody who just has annoying symptoms and awful symptoms, or maybe you've been diagnosed with a serious disease, parasites are the first place that you must look. Before we talk about the different types of tests and how parasites are diagnosed, what I'd like to do is first talk about what a parasite is, because sometimes we are overlooking things. So parasites are any microbes that are living off of a host. So in us, we're the host, and they need us for their food, for a safe home, and a safe place to reproduce. And some of us think about worms, that worms are the only types of parasites that we could be dealing with. But we know that fungi, different types of fungus, whether it's molds or whether it's different types of yeast, and also bacteria, some bacteria like salmonella or Borrelia, which is associated with Lyme disease. There are many others also. And then protozoa, which are small single-celled parasites. Those would be other types of parasites. And then also when we start to move to bigger ones, we're talking about the worms for sure. And those would be roundworms and flatworms, and which are like flukes, and tapeworms. So those are just some. And then there are other parasites too. We could have fleas or ticks. Those would be ectoparasites, which would be on the outside of our body. But before we go any further, I would really encourage you to please like this video and share it. Help me get the word out. The sooner that we have more and more people aware about how the parasites are the biggest cause of their symptoms, then we can really start to bring change to how we treat chronic disease and just autoimmune disease and awful symptoms that we're living with. We don't have to live with them. So again, a parasite is something that lives off of us. I forgot to mention, if you're new, if you haven't listened to any of my trainings, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you will know when I'm live. This is the first time that I am hosting live on Facebook and YouTube at the same time. Hopefully you guys can hear me. So I can't tell. Hello, Kimmy and Barry and Wendy, Cindy. I'm not sure where you're on Facebook or YouTube, but I've got a moderator, so she'll figure all of that out. I'm going to continue. So again, now we know what parasites are. We're talking about fungi, bacteria, single-celled parasites. We're talking about worms, and we won't talk that much about the fleas and the ticks, etc., because we know them, we can see them, they're on the outside. But going on, what I'd like to talk about are the symptoms first of all. And if you haven't watched my previous video, I did the common symptoms of parasites. And it's really important to understand that the symptoms of parasites, they vary tremendously. Everything from gut, which a lot of us are kind of familiar with, whether we have gas or constipation, bloating, pain, or maybe diarrhea and blood. So those would all be symptoms that we would be familiar with. But then we can have a lot of head issues where we have the cognitive issues and the mood swings and severe anxiety. That's a really big one, or depression. And not just that, but pain and neurological symptoms, allergies. So if you haven't watched my video, I go into a lot more detail, but you'll be really shocked at the variety of symptoms that are caused by parasites. Very important to understand, because this is what I'm talking about is something that should be really well understood. It's something that's been forgotten in our standard of care, and even our integrative practitioners who are really looking at a holistic approach to helping us recover. Unless you've seen the parasites, right, that are coming out of us, we really have no idea how infested we are. So when we're when we're dealing with symptoms, let's say we have gut issues, or we just know something's off with our health and it's kind of troublesome and we haven't had a diagnosis yet, we'll go to our medical doctor. And if we suspect that we're dealing with parasites, then we may ask to have a stool test done. And more people are becoming aware of parasites, that they are an issue. Our doctor, traditionally, if it's a medically trained doctor, they have not been trained in recognizing or identifying parasites, because they're taught that the only way we can get a parasite is if we travel to a country that is not developed. And nothing could be farther from the truth. If you have pets, you know that you're supposed to deworm them at least once, twice, or 3 times a year. And we do buy produce from all over the world, which can have parasites on them. They're in our soil. If you work out in the garden, you're exposed to them. So they're all over the place. So what I'm trying to say is that, unfortunately, our medically trained doctors, they really do not believe that we would have a parasite infestation unless, let's say, we were just traveling recently. What they will typically do, if you insist, and it's a really great doctor and they want to work with you, they will do a stool test, where a lot of times it's covered depending on what country you're living in, and there's no harm in having that done. But when I had a stool test done years and years ago, my doctor told me, he said, the labs typically will only analyze people that have diarrhea, because they think that could be involved with a parasite. But if you're constipated, you have to smush up the stool, otherwise they're not really going to test it. So they're looking more at loose, watery stool, and they're not understanding that constipation is caused by these parasites also in a big way. So the students I work with, they have severe constipation. And as we correct the microbes in the intestines, that subsides. And they finally, for the first time, have bowel movements daily, which is amazing. And that's how we should have it. So that's usually where people start, is they go to their MD and they are tested there. And usually you'll get a false negative test. The tests are not accurate, unfortunately, so they're going to miss things. If they don't see the eggs and if they don't see the worm, then they'll say it's a negative test. Sometimes, very often, these worms, they don't live in the intestines all the time. They come down to the intestines to mate, but depending on the part of their life cycle, they are not living in the intestines, and things are missed. So usually it's a false negative test result, which is really unfortunate. They may pick up small parasites, things like protozoa. Maybe there's blastocystis hominis or some type of entamoeba, some of the more common single-cell protozoa. But that's not really what's causing the bulk of the problem for most people. Myself, I tested years and years ago, I tested positive for blastocystis, and the doctor tried to treat it with antibiotics, and I didn't notice any difference in my symptoms or my health. So although we shouldn't have those small protozoa, they're missing the big elephant in the room, unfortunately. So the first thing is, the number one would be the stool tests or fecal tests. The second one, where they might look at your blood, depending what type of parasite. If you traveled, for example, and maybe you were in a different country where you could have been exposed to malaria, they can do a blood test. They may look for antibodies for different types of parasites or antigens from the parasites. They also might do a blood smear where they take a drop of your blood, they put it on a slide, they might stain it, and they look for little parasites. So in that case, the lab could look for little worms. They're called filarial worms. They're tiny. They would be difficult to see with the naked eye, the size of the dot of a pen or smaller. And Babesia, that's another common protozoa type which would infect our red blood cells. So you'd have to see that under the microscope, and that's very common with multiple sclerosis. So there's these tiny, tiny little ones that they can see that are infecting our cells or maybe in our blood, or tiny worms, or they're looking for the antibodies. So maybe our immune system has been fighting a certain parasite, or the antigen of the parasite itself. And then they also often will look at our eosinophils, which are a type of white blood cell. So it's our immune cell. It's one of the types of immune cells that really goes after parasites. And it's interesting that we can have higher than normal eosinophil levels, or eosinophilia. We can have that present if we have, let's say, aspergillus, which is a type of mold infection, or different types of parasites, flukes, nematodes, filarial worms, and protozoa. So they could see higher than normal the eosinophils when we have certain parasites. It's also interesting that they see higher than normal eosinophils when we have different types of diseases, like different cancers. It could be lung cancer, it could be lymphoma, leukemia, thyroid cancer, cervix cancer, vaginal or penis cancer, bladder, skin cancer, colorectal cancers. So we know that, again, the eosinophils are white blood cells that they're the soldiers that go after parasites. They go after parasites, infections. And also, I should say, allergies. They're higher in allergies. So if we know that they are our defense against parasites, and we know they're higher when we have certain parasites because our immune system is fighting them, and we know that they're higher in certain chronic diseases like malignancies and also other types of diseases and allergies, etc., then should we not make the connection that maybe those diseases are linked with parasites? Absolutely. And that's what we're seeing with our students, and that is how they're recovering. Another really important thing to note is that what we have noticed with our students, and this is a nugget that we've gained, when we have chronic parasite infections for years, then the eosinophil levels are not necessarily elevated anymore. So in chronic parasitic infections, the eosinophil level may be normal. So maybe your doctor will look at the eosinophils in your blood work and say, oh, they're normal, you don't have parasites. And in the scientific literature, it says that that happens because, as I mentioned, there's lots of reasons for it, but sometimes the parasites move out of the blood, they move into our tissue, for example. So that's what we have observed, and please be aware that if your eosinophils are normal in your CBC count, in your white blood count, for example, the test results you get back, that doesn't mean you don't have parasites. What I found really interesting is that sometimes doctors will use different types of, let's say, MRI or CAT scan or X-rays to try to identify parasites. And what's so fascinating is that reading right on the CDC website, which is so neat, I'm just going to share it with you, so that these tests, so the CAT scan, the MRI, and X-rays, so these tests are used to look for parasitic diseases that cause lesions in the organs. Lesions. If you have multiple sclerosis, you know that you've had an MRI done, more than likely, and they are a very big part of our diagnosis is that they're looking for lesions in our central nervous system. So if parasites can cause lesions in our organs, do you think they could cause lesions in our central nervous system? Absolutely. So that I found really fascinating. That's the first time I've seen that. And I just want to say too, just as a little thing, and I share this, maybe what you should do is at some point, if you have MS, make sure to go look through my other videos I did do a video about MRIs, and it really helps you to understand the shortcomings and the shortfalls of using that as a diagnostic tool. Another way that the medically trained specialists, the gastroenterologists, they may use a colonoscopy or an endoscopy, one of those two. So with the endoscopy, that's where they take a little camera and they insert it down your mouth, down your esophagus, through your stomach, and they look at your small intestines. But what I have found is that whether it's the colonoscopy or endoscopy, they're usually looking for inflammation. And this is the frustrating thing, is that we know that inflammation is our immune system fighting infection, parasites. But unfortunately, in the medical community, they don't know what causes inflammation. They just know that our immune system is attacking, it's active, and that's the inflammation, and they want to shut the inflammation down. So they want to suppress the immune system instead of treating the parasites. So usually when you're doing a colonoscopy, they're looking for inflammation and not for parasites. And it's difficult to find parasites because, number one, they're not looking for them really because they don't feel that you have them because you didn't travel, if you didn't travel. And secondly, again, the parasites, depending where they're hiding, they can hide under biofilms. Depending on the type of their life cycle, adults, they could die, or maybe they're in the egg phase, they move out of the intestines. So these two ways of finding parasites is not very effective. So I hope you're seeing a trend here that it is difficult to get a proper diagnosis when we're dealing with parasites. So we're missing a lot, and that is why we're seeing such an epidemic of chronic disease in our world today, is that we are infested with parasites. And if you haven't watched any of my other videos, make sure to go over them. So I have a playlist on MS and infection where you can actually see the parasites that our students are passing. You can see the different types of infections that we're treating to recover. We've got a bunch of people that have shared on my website, livediseasefree.com, but also on our YouTube, Live Disease Free, and Facebook, Live Disease Free. You can hear their stories. I can tell you, they are infested. I have passed a ton of parasites, even being MS free, because I could never be treated. I live in Canada, and our doctors, I've met with several young doctors, and they are so interested in what we're doing, but they're like, our hands are tied. We can do the stool test, but they'll come back false negative, and we cannot write prescriptions to treat parasites. And it makes you really wonder why, right? Because we can deworm our dogs, but we can't deworm ourselves. It's crazy. What I'd like to do is spend a couple of minutes talking about how the integrative practitioners are diagnosing parasites. We talked about how the medically trained are, and now we'll talk a few minutes about how the integrative practitioners. So depending whether it's like a functional medicine or a naturopathic physician, or sometimes even chiropractors, they're very interested in all of this. But if they're going to do they can do, depending on the practitioner, they can still do blood work, right? They can do that. They sometimes will do a comprehensive stool analysis where they're taking a sample of your stool and they are measuring a greater number of microbes, a lot of anaerobic bacteria, aerobic bacteria. Like they're looking at profiles to see, do you have diversity? They're looking to see if you have different types of fungi, fungus, candida, yeasts, molds, for example. So those are the kinds of things they're looking at. And they cost, usually, the last time I looked, it was over $500 to have that test done. And I can tell you from personal experience and working with a lot of students that it is not a good use of your funds, because you may find that you have some anaerobic bacteria a little bit elevated that you shouldn't, or other bacteria, or maybe you have some fungus. You don't need a test really to determine if you have fungal overgrowth. Symptoms will tell you, and you can save the $500. But unfortunately, a lot of people are getting this test done. They're missing all of the big parasites. So the big worms, whether and small worms, because even the small filarial worms that make their way all the way into our central nervous system, we know that they carry their own microbes. For example, Borrelia is just one. So they're infecting us with Lyme disease right in our central nervous system. They probably have many other microbes, right, that are living in them. So every time they deposit their waste, they are infecting us, plus the fungi love their waste material. So the yeast, et cetera, loves to grow in that kind of environment. So they're making a toxic environment. They're producing chemicals, all of that. So I talk a lot about these things on different videos. I'll stick with the testing right now. So again, the integrative practitioners, they might do or ask to do a comprehensive stool analysis. And I've just shared with you that I personally wouldn't do that. I wouldn't pay $500 for it. You can also have blood work done, or any fluid. It can be saliva, it could be urine, it could be blood work, it could be stool, where they're looking for the DNA profile of different types of parasites. So this is an up and coming field, but the problem is these tests are, again, they're like $750 to $1,000 per test, and they don't have the sequences of all the parasites, unfortunately. When they do, that's going to be really, really helpful for us, but they don't right now. So you may spend that money and you may not know what you're dealing with. That is a big problem. And then sometimes the integrative practitioners may order a urine test, which wouldn't be as expensive. Again, it might pick up metabolites and toxins that are produced by fungi and other microbes that are in you, which can be helpful, but again, it's looking at the byproducts or the toxins that are produced by the parasites themselves. And they're not going to pick up the big worms, unfortunately. I've seen more to do with, for sure, things like the fungus, absolutely. Let's see if there's any other things that I wanted to share as far as with the parasites. So we talked about the urinate, we talked about the DNA, and that's it, and the comprehensive stool analysis. So it's really difficult to get a diagnosis of a parasitic infestation. It's really frustrating. I work with people every day. That is my job. We work with the Live Disease Free Academy. We have wellness champions that are recovering from chronic disease. Some of them have not had a diagnosis, and they just have a lot of awful symptoms, and they know they're dealing with parasites. And because it's so challenging to even find an integrative practitioner that understands this at this time, it's really unfortunate. It is coming, but it's not here yet. The best way to be tested is, number one, do you have symptoms of parasites, right? Do you have symptoms of fungus? Do you have symptoms of worms? Do you have symptoms of the Lyme disease? And if you do, then taking samples of the commonly helpful and prescribed anti-parasite and antifungal drug treatments, when you take, let's say, one pill of them and you go to a practitioner who does some type of energy testing. So this could be whether they're using a machine like a Vega machine or AMA or EAV. There's a bunch of different machines that will measure energy. Or they might do muscle testing. So those would be two different ways. So they'll hold up a sample to you and they'll see, does this balance you? Does this strengthen you? And again, you want to make sure that it's a good practitioner, somebody who uses this in their practice. So not somebody who's done a weekend course in muscle testing, for sure, but maybe a chiropractor or a naturopathic physician or a nurse practitioner or a functional medicine doctor, somebody who has a lot of background in health. They've invested a lot in themselves, and they use this daily in their practice. And so if they know what they're doing and they're very skilled at it, that you'll hold a sample and they'll energy test you, whether by machine or just your strength. And they'll say, yes, this tests well for you. Nope, not that one, not that one. Yes, this one. And then you'll, instead of trying to figure out which parasites you have, because that's where we're at this point, instead of trying to figure out which parasites you have, then you can figure out which of the treatments are most helpful for the parasites that I have. And that is how the wellness champions are recovering, and that is really helpful. I am really hoping, and I am in contact with labs that do DNA testing, and as they have more and more, and it's challenging because, for example, roundworms, they are the most abundant worm or animal. They're the most abundant animal in the world. I've read in one of the scientific magazines, 4 out of 5 animals are roundworms. So you can imagine how challenging it is to sequence hundreds of even the filarial worms or the bigger worms, smaller. There are many different sizes. Our students are passing worms, obviously that we can't see, and all the way up to over 2 feet long. And our students, the sicker they are, the more infested they are. It's absolutely crazy how infested. Like we just had our call yesterday for the academy, and one of our students recovering from PLS, she has been treating, and we use drug treatments, the parasite drug treatments. We also use an oxidizing agent with enemas to kill them on contact that way, which is safe and effective. And we're also using herbs, and we're prepping first. We're really prepping first so that the treatments will be more effective. And the picture she shared with me, it looks like spaghetti in the toilet. It's just crazy. She is on her road to recover from PLS, which is an incurable disease. And I have hundreds and hundreds of pictures. I am going to be showing more and more. Some people don't like to look at them, but I get so excited looking at them because I know that my students are recovering. So with this lady, this beautiful lady, passing all those worms, sometimes it's within just a few hours, they notice that their mobility improves that quickly. It's shocking. And of course, the more disabled we are, the more infested we are, the more work we have to do. But the exciting thing is that we're seeing with people that have advanced multiple sclerosis, that have not walked for many years, that they have to treat really well, but after multiple treatment cycles, they're starting to stand, they're starting to use walkers, and they haven't walked for like 15 years. So it's a very exciting time for MS, for PLS, for all the neurological diseases. And of course, these people, they don't just have MS or PLS. Like some of the people with MS, they have diabetes and MS, they've had cancer and multiple sclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease, arthritis. So all of these conditions are clearing up as we are correcting the microbiome, and that is the key. So I hope that you understand that at this point, I will definitely let you know when we are starting to see better test results and an easier way to be diagnosed. But right now, that is our biggest challenge. That is our biggest struggle. I'm going to go to a few questions, and I just wanted to share with you that maybe you're at a place where this is the first time we've met and you've never met me before, but this makes sense. Maybe you have been like one gentleman I talked to today. He has invested over $100,000 in his health. He's young. I'm seeing a lot of people in their 30s now. When I started coaching, I would say the majority of people that I started coaching were in their 50s and 60s, and now a very large number of people that I'm coaching and helping them to recover from MS. And even before, they're just dealing with horrible neurological symptoms. They're in their 30s, which is awful. But if you're at that place, it's like, this makes so much sense. Finally, I think I'm on the right track. It could be parasites. Make sure to watch my videos. Make sure to get to know me and start to learn and start to implement. The eating plan is the first step. Absolutely. Start to make changes. And then when you're at that place, you're like, okay, I get it. This is challenging. I haven't been able to find someone to help me. Make sure at that point to reach out and watch my masterclass training, How to Recover from MS. It's not just for MS. So make sure to watch that. And then when you finish watching it, if you want to join me, then you'll be able to fill out a form. And if we feel you're ready, then we will send you an email and you can listen to the Coach-a-thon, which really explains the academy in detail, like all the steps you're going to do to recover, the cost, etc. And then you and I are going to chat. Or you can join before or after, but we're going to chat before we go to work together. And I'm super excited to support you in your recovery. All right, I'm going to go to a few little questions here. Thank you. Danielle posted my masterclass training in the feed, so you guys can get it there. Okay, I see that there is Facebook, there is YouTube. Yay, it worked. Awesome. This is my first time on both of them, and it worked. Hi, Aurora. You saw the videos that showed parasites and worms. And I gave you the clean pictures. Like, my students don't always clean them off that nicely, and I really don't care. Sometimes they're in the toilet, sometimes there's stool attached, etc. So, Mary, for some reason you're not able to join the live session. There will be a replay. Make sure to join. And if you are listening to the replay, go ahead and type your questions in. We've got people that are answering questions. I will answer as many questions as I can also. I'll take like 10 minutes here or so. So hello, Aurora. Hi, Rob. Hi, Maureen. Hi, Dawn. Aurora, you were diagnosed with Parkinson's, PD, I believe that's what it is. It's caused by parasites, honestly. That's where you need to focus. You need to get into that area. So eating plan, decreasing the carbs. Most of the parasitic worms, fungus, and bacteria, their favorite food is carbohydrates and sugars. So as you get that down, that is the first step. And then just, like I said, reach out to me when you're ready. Hi, Barry. Hi, Wendy. Hi, Cindy. Cutting out. Sorry. It will be recorded. So, hi, Aurora. So you've been listening to my videos and you're very worried with the infections in your disease. Do I have parasites? Probably yes, maybe fungus. And I'm sure if you're dealing with disease, you have more worms than you could ever imagine. My students that are not very disabled, let's say they're catching multiple sclerosis early, some of them don't have a diagnosis yet, or maybe they've been diagnosed for a year or two, or they're highly functioning, they're still able to work. When they start treating, they are absolutely shocked how many worms are coming out. They're like, how can I still be alive when I'm passing these many worms? And the exciting thing is that as they are coming out, that's where we really notice the neurological symptoms change and improve really quickly, a lot more quickly. So the stiffness and the tremors, all caused by parasites, Aurora, and slow movements. And I didn't have enough time because I was helping my neighbor. She got in a car accident. But I will, on the next training, which will be next week, I am going to introduce or share some of the successes. Every week I have amazing successes from our students on the call. It's always on a Tuesday night call, and then I do this on Wednesday. So I'll share the successes of what's happening right now in real time. Hi, Aurora. So you were wondering, the stool test for worms, it's done. So again, we do not advocate, let's say if you have, your stool test would be covered through your health plan. So in Canada, I could go, if my doctor agrees to it, I can have a stool test done and it doesn't cost me any money. It's not going to hurt. I'll have it done, but nothing's ever shown up with it. So if you want to do that, it's fine. They might find something, like Blastocystis hominis or some type of small protozoa. But I don't encourage the students at this time to do any stool test because I'm all about saving money. And if the stool test gave them the answer, the DNA, I think, will be the most helpful for us. And I have given, for example, I've talked to different labs and I've said, okay, can you test for these specific filarial worms? And they're like, no, we don't have the sequences for that. So what they have to do is they have to find the genetic code, or they have to map out the genetic code for each worm and each protozoa. And so they have some common ones, but they don't have all of them. So at this point, I would save my money and I would just basically go, do I have a lot of symptoms of parasites? Yes. And then just assume you do, and then do the energy testing for sure. Unfortunately, at this time, Aurora, our doctors and our neurologists and doctors are trained more in the medically, like the pharmaceuticals that are more immunosuppressive. And for the neurologists, it's really the disease-modifying drugs. That is really the most help or the most education they have. So they're experts at the disease-modifying drugs, which are the immunosuppressive drugs, and that's not what we need. We do not need to suppress our immune system. We need to treat the infections and support our immune system. Okay, just a couple more. And we have, let's see, You're very welcome. Hi, Peggy. Hi, KJ. Awesome. You're still part of our group here. And a couple of last things I wanted to share. Cindy's asking, are worms and parasites the same thing? A worm is a type of parasite, and there's different types of worms too. We can have flukes, which are flatworms. We can have roundworms, which could be this tiny that you see under a microscope, all the way up to 2 feet or 3 feet long. And tapeworms, they can be up to 30 feet long. So that's just one type of parasite. But a parasite, again, if you go back and listen to the beginning of my training, it's anything that lives in us. It's feasting off of our food. We're feeding it, and it reproduces inside of us, and we're providing a safe home for it. We're the host. It's pretty impossible, Allison, not to have carbs. All the vegetables include carbs. So if you are eating a carnivore diet, then you may not be having any carbs. Maybe you have reduced the complex carbohydrates. Maybe you've gone off of grains. But even things like eating a lot of nuts or avocados or carrots, etc., can still feed the infections. So you're probably eating a lot cleaner, but there are certain vegetables and produce that will still feed these infections. So with the eating plan, I've got a playlist. If you want to look at that on YouTube, Live Disease Free, there are several videos about what we find is the most helpful eating plan. And of course, if you join us in the academy, you're going to fine tune that a lot, and I check your work, because that's the first step. You can't treat these parasites if you keep feeding them. So we, first of all, greatly reduce the food to the parasites, and we greatly introduce or increase the nutrition to us. Then we do several steps to support the body, to build ourselves up, to make ourselves stronger, open up detox pathways, and then we go into the treatment phase. And with doing those first, we have much more success. We have true success. Otherwise, it just doesn't work, unfortunately. So with that, I'm going to let you guys go. Next week, I am going to talk about how do we get parasites. So this is number one, to create awareness so that you really understand that we are exposed to parasites all the time. But secondly, how can we actually minimize our exposure to these parasites? What kind of things can we do to minimize our exposure? So again, make sure to if you joined us late, please like this video. Please share it with others. Help us get the word out so that people understand there is an answer. They don't have to live with these horrible symptoms or these horrible diseases. And if you're new to my trainings, make sure to subscribe on YouTube and hit the notification bell so that you'll know when I'm going live, because you can ask questions. And if you're joining in a replay, make sure to put your questions in. We will answer them. We love answering your questions. And again, if you're ready to treat, reach out, watch my masterclass training. I'd love to support you in your recovery. So until next week, take care and bye-bye for now.